I'd like to introduce Mavonna Ellis, going to talk to you this morning on alcoholic families. And I'll let her tell a little more about her background.
Thanks. As some of you know, I recognize a few faces as I look around. I've been on campus since the 1st of January, and I'm doing an internship from OSU, finishing my doctorate in counseling. Most of my background and practicum work has been in mental health clinics and 1 year in Austin in private practice with a psychiatrist. So it's kind of a new experience to be on campus and working with students and to feel so visible. Living here and working here and going in the classes, it's kind of a different new experience for me. When I'm coming today, I'm wanting to talk to you about dysfunctional families. This will include alcoholic families, but it is also any type of family that's not operating in a way that helps people to grow and be healthy and to be happy. In addition to being a little uncomfortable with all the lights and the camera, didn't get much sleep last night because my son called me, and he's going to school out at Alvin, like some of you, working to support himself through with me in graduate school, and his father died, so he doesn't have any other support. He saved all his money to go on a skiing trip, and for some reason he put it in his jacket. He was going to go get traveler's checks, left his jacket at a friend's house, and somebody stole the money. So I got a phone call last night, and I was a little distressed. I kept waking up during the night thinking about this poor child and what he was going to do and how this was going to come out, how upset he was, and hoping he learned a lesson. But the other thing I also thought as this was going on was what my response could be that would be helpful to him, and what it could be that could make him feel even more sad about it, or more uncomfortable, or even feel that he'd done something wrong. And I thought during the period of time that I talked to him, how growing up in a pretty dysfunctional family, what the response from my family might have been, and how I could give him something different. And so before he hung up, he said, "Mother, I'm really glad I called you. I feel so much better about what's happened and about myself." And I actually didn't solve anything other than just being there with him and talking to him and understanding how bad he was feeling. I figured he didn't need me beating on him after he'd already done something he thought was really dumb, you know. So what I want to talk to you about is how, when we were growing up or you were growing up, what was your family like? The idea that I have is that you can't understand the frog unless you know the swamp he came out of. It's hard to understand yourself unless you have some idea of what the family system was like that you grew up in. The environment that you grow up in definitely affects who and how you are. And for some of us, we grew up in what we call dysfunctional families. They're families that did not provide you with a warm, nurturing, loving, accepting environment for healthy growth. There's different kinds of dysfunctional families. One type of dysfunctional family, of course, and we're hearing a lot about it anymore, is an alcoholic family. They're getting to look more and more at how, when you're growing up in a family with one or both parents drinking excessively, what type of system this produces and how you turn out. But there's other dysfunctional families, and one of them I was kind of surprised. I guess I hadn't thought about it. But they're talking about a military family. People that grow up in a military family, it's usually a very dysfunctional type system. Very authoritarian, very programmed. There's lots of things that go on in those types of families. Fundamentalist religious groups usually have a very dysfunctional system. If you have a parent that has chronic physical or mental illness, or someone in the family, a parent, or that has very compulsive behavior, alcoholism, it can be workaholic, anything that's very, very compulsive, that they just have to have everything, certain way. If you grow up in one of these families, the life that you're living in is usually pretty inconsistent. It will be unpredictable, distrustful, often a lot of denial that there's anything going on. This friend was telling me a story, typical of denial. So he grew up in a family, his father drank a lot, and he said that all kinds of things going on, but it was just never mentioned. Nobody ever talked about it. And so one night, he and his sister were they'd gone up to bed, and they heard all this racket downstairs, and they were so frightened because they were used to the fights and used to all this, and so they didn't get up. Matter of fact, his sister came down the hall into his room, and brought her blanket and laid down there on the floor because they were so afraid. And after a while, they heard this big bang like a gun going off, and they said they just, ignored it and went to sleep. And the next morning, they got up, they went down to breakfast, and here's this big hole in the wall in the kitchen. And his mother's cooking the breakfast, and the father's hungover, and no one ever said a word. Said by the time they got home from school, the hole was patched, and nothing was ever said. That's a very dysfunctional system. It starts causing people to deny their own reality of what's going on is even what's going on. It's like, did I really see a hole in the wall, And their mother acted like nothing was wrong. Just fed them breakfast, and everybody sat down and ate and talked this light, friendly little talk, and went off to school. A lot of denial. Lack of affection. When people are fighting or there are all these things going on, there's not a lot of warmth in sharing and hugging and affection. I've got a note on my door. I stick little things up on my door. And one of the things that Virginia Satir is she's a noted family therapist, and one of the things that she says is that for children growing up, and for adults too in a little bit different way, that children need at least 4 hugs a day just for survival. This is a minimum requirement. You need 8 hugs a day just to have some healthy growth of your mind and body, and a full dozen to be able to grow spiritually, mentally, and physically. When you're growing up in a family with all kinds of problems going on and the system's not loving and nurturing, there's not much time for people to take out to give a child 12 hugs a day. And even as adults, though we may not need all of that physical hugging, if we have some good systems, we need it in a symbolic way. Someone smiling at us, someone saying, hey, you're okay, someone acknowledging us, someone telling us they like us. All kinds of ways to get hugs. In addition to lack of affection, you get very little attention from these parents. In most of these kinds of families, there's a lot of parental neglect. And when I'm talking to you about this is not an overall thing. There's some families that, alcoholic families, that maybe the mother gets into Al-Anon or the father gets into Al-Anon, and they're better able to keep their own sense of serenity and to be able to care for the children. They're also just people that grow up that have a pretty good sense of their self and can maintain this and are pretty loving and can share it with the children. But overall, when one parent's in pain and doing something, the other one is too. And it's real hard to have this emotional energy left to nurture the children that are growing up. In addition to parental neglect, there's usually a lot of feelings of abandonment. And to a degree, a lot of times you have been abandoned, emotionally at least. Overall, the family usually is functioning in pain. And in a family that's having a lot of pain, everybody hurts. They talk about some of the feelings that a child in this kind of environment will have. One thing, probably the first thing, is fear. If you're living in a house and people are fighting or there's a lot of drinking going on, hear a lot of children talk about getting in the car and riding somewhere with a parent that's drunk. Um, just the constant fighting and being afraid that one parent's going to kill the other. Or if you get in the way and try to break it up, that you're going to get hit or knocked around. When you're living in these kinds of families, there's certain rules that you learn. And they talk about a lot of this. You know, maybe some of you have been acquainted with some of the work that Janet Woditz and Sharon Wegscheider Cruz, some of the new writers, people that are coming up with work for adult children of alcoholics. And they basically look at alcoholics, but it's really any dysfunctional family. Any family that you don't have the mother and father here at the top, well, really the husband and wife at the top, then acting as mother and father underneath that, and separate, taking care and the kids down here. Any family that is not keeping that system and is not providing that warmth and love. But they talk about in these families that the children learn not to think, not to talk, and not to feel. It's too painful to feel sometimes. A lot of times if you talk about it, you get in all kinds of trouble, or it's denied, or there's just things going on. So these are kind of family rules that people learn. After a while, I'm going to give you all a little family rule thing, and you can kind of check out where you are on this. What kind of family rules did you learn, or what kind of things did you perceive growing up? Next thing that people usually learn is guilt. Somehow, when you're growing up in a family with a lot of pain, children decide it must be their fault. If I was just prettier, smarter, nicer, mommy or daddy would be happy. And they grow up sometimes really trying hard all the time, trying to be better so somebody can love them and accept them. The third thing is rage. People who grow up in these types of families oftentimes become unreasonably angry at the people they love the most. I can remember, I grew up in a real dysfunctional family with a mother with a lot of mental illness and a father with a violent temper. And I can remember after I was grown, my sister saying to me, I always thought it was my fault that mother was ill and that daddy was mad. And I said, isn't that funny? I was always just madder than heck at them for making such a miserable place for me to grow up in. So we had a little bit different attitude, but both grew up with some feelings and some things that haven't been real helpful in our life. A lot of rage. When things are out of our control, we oftentimes become what they term control freaks. Control freaks are people who try to control the situations they're in, the emotions, and the relationships. And you see a lot of this in people that grew up in dysfunctional families. Everything around you is out of control. You can't control if it's drinking or whatever's going on. And so you start trying to make everything safe for yourself. And it makes these people real uncomfortable if they're not in control. So they want to control everything that's going on around them. Usually very insecure inside, very frightened inside. And they need constant approval. Because people growing up in this kind of family oftentimes want constant approval, they want love, they're real fearful, they're really insecure. Oftentimes they'll put up with unacceptable behavior of other people just to be accepted. So they'll tend to get into more relationships where they're doing one of two things. Sometimes they're trying still to save that family of origin by recreating it in their life. You know, I couldn't save mother or daddy or their relationship, but I'll go out and I'll marry someone who drinks too much and I'll save him. I'll love him enough that he'll quit. They will marry somebody oftentimes that's abusive, that will hit them. Because if you grow up in a family and you see people hitting, it seems the norm. It seems what's okay. It's what you're comfortable with. At some level, probably it's what you feel you need, or, well, when I say need, that you deserve. maybe is a better word. There's a story I wanted to share with you that one of these writers talks about on a tape she has on adult children of alcoholics, and she says there's this lady, and she'd had a real unhappy time in her relationships, and she'd grown up in a real dysfunctional family, and she wanted love and all this, and so things really weren't going well, and she got really depressed. So her friend came along, and she said, hey, she said, come on, so I'm going to take you out of the house. You've been seeing this house all week. You're really depressed. She said, come on, I want to take you to the zoo. So she took her to the zoo, and they're walking around, and while they're at the zoo, they're feeding the gorilla, and the gorilla breaks out of the cage, and it comes after them. Well, the gorilla sees this woman that'd been really depressed, and something about her attracts him. And he comes after her, he knocks her down, he rips her clothes off, and he assaults her. This gorilla rapes this lady. So they finally come and they get him off, and they take her to the hospital, and she doesn't talk, and she doesn't talk, and she's in a terrible depression, and her friend's really, really upset about it. And so she comes to the hospital, and she's trying to talk to her, and finally her friend looks up at her, and tears rolling down her face, and she said, well, what can I do to help? And she said, well, there isn't anything you can do. She said, I don't know what's the matter with me. He hasn't called. He hasn't written. You know, you grow up in these dysfunctional families, and you'll look for love, or you'll accept unacceptable behavior or anything sometimes that you can get, and try to turn it into a relationship. She's taking this terrible incident, and you know, the main thing she's most upset about is he hadn't called and he hadn't written. He really didn't love me. No, that poor gorilla probably really didn't love her, you know. He probably really didn't know how. And what sometimes we do is look for people that really don't know how. And we're real upset and disappointed when they can't give us what we want or need. In a dysfunctional family, and I'm just going to give you children of alcoholics deal here. Go. Here, pass it around. Just take one and you can look at it. It's talking about adult children of alcoholics. They do not learn what normal is. This poor lady, she didn't know even what normal was. Any attention was good. They do not learn effective coping skills. Did I pass out on that? No? Not doing well this morning. I don't know how y'all get up and around this early. I'm not functioning real well. When you're growing up in a family and these kinds of things are going on, you don't learn how to cope very well. Good coping skills are not there. Oftentimes you'll continue to function out of the child within, and we're talking about here that inside of each one of us we have a child, a part of us that feels insecure, frightened, that is still like we were when we were 5 or 6 or younger. But it's also the part that has all the creativity and the joy and the happiness and those things too. But these people have a tendency to function out of the child part of them. They don't know oftentimes what they want, and they can't make decisions. You're growing up in a real dysfunctional family, you just haven't learned certain skills. Oftentimes have low self-esteem, are not able to trust people, and can't receive or accept anything, affection or lots of things from other people. If you grow up in this kind of system, if you survive, you know, some people really don't survive. They have lots of problems. You know, they pick up the same behaviors, and they tend to end up with emotional problems or drinking problems or drug problems, whatever. But if you do survive in that system and somehow you haven't bought into it and you've tried to make your way through, that you'll tend to end up with certain personality characteristics. And these, you know, again, I'm talking to you about just kind of generalities. Not that everyone does all of these, but sometimes you can see parts of these in yourself if you've grown up in these kind of systems. Oftentimes the labels that will be attached to people who are growing up in real dysfunctional families is that they're possessive. you're going to be real insecure inside. Self-centered. How else in that kind of system probably did you survive? You know, you had to take care of yourself. Oftentimes no one's taking care of you. The child's raising himself, herself. Very rigid. It's hard to be real comfortable and relaxed if there's a system around you that's all out of kilter. Tend to be a people pleaser, wanting that love and affection, wanting to be accepted. And extremely independent, which the flip side of that is extremely dependent. But oftentimes it comes across as independent, but with feelings inside of being dependent. You know, so far all these things that sound kind of negative, you know, I'm thinking, God, I'm going to give them all the negative first and then come back with some positive things. And one of the positive personality characteristics, or some of the positive characteristics, are that when you grow up in these kinds of families, and if you're able to survive in them and to stay mostly together, you'll tend to be very achievement oriented. Tenacious, you can really hang on and not give up. Responsible, because oftentimes these children have been taking care of the other children in the family, taking care of a parent in many ways, doing the shopping, the housework. Oftentimes these children have turned into parental children. Be very responsible. They're very loyal, oftentimes loyal to the point of not talking about what's going on in the family outside to anyone, which tends to isolate you from other people, and then you don't learn good coping skills and good effective ways of living. They can be very organized, are other directed, usually interested in other people and other people's welfare, oftentimes end up in helping professions. Lots of psychologists and counselors and things come out of these kind of family systems. Have an inner strength. How else would you get by? Be very sensitive. Will tend to avoid conflicts. They're people pleasers, again, and that can be both negative and a positive type of thing. To care about other people and try to please them can be real positive. To accept unacceptable behavior from others because you want to be accepted it can be negative. And they're good problem solvers. You find oftentimes people like this, they're real good in a crisis and really good at problem solving because you've grown up in families where you've had to deal with a lot of problems and trauma and trying to take care of things. But oftentimes not real good at long-term carrying goals out. I am wondering every once in a while, am I going to have what it takes to carry through and finish a dissertation, you know, that kind of thing. Can I carry through and finish a project I start all the way through? Really good at emergencies, but not too good on the long haul. Haven't learned to do that. The positive qualities, though, of people that grow up in these kinds of families and the problem solving, and if they're survivors, the positive qualities enable them to learn and change and be successful in life. And one of the things I notice in working with children that come from dysfunctional families that come in for counseling is that what they haven't learned are good coping skills. They haven't learned what normal is. They haven't learned some of the things that other people pick up in fairly healthy families. And once you start working with them, they've got all these other qualities that as soon as they get a database to work out of and some new knowledge, it's just like they take off, you know. It's almost like they're better than before, better than people that grow up in these nice, healthy families and don't have the coping abilities and things for all of the trauma. They tend to get both. The steps to change, basically, I think, is education. If someone comes in to see me and they've grown up in a real dysfunctional family, I just start giving them information. You broaden that database and help them to learn new skills. And one of the things that's real important is that you are able to replace the negative tapes, the negative images, the negative parenting that you have with a positive image. And there's all kinds of things you can do in counseling to help to change some of these images and to put a picture in your head of what a good parent is like, what it would feel like to have been raised with a good parent. And when I'm saying a good parent, I don't mean they aren't good people, but people, they're living out of their history and their swamp they came out of, doing the best usually they know how, but sometimes it isn't very good. Oftentimes it's that we have to do grief work, because the child within each one of us, if they've grown up in all of these kinds of traumas and turmoil and unhappiness and pain, we have a child inside of us that is really, really weeping and sad and needs to go through a process of grief and rebuilding. It's real important for these people, and I'm saying these people, I'm talking about any of us that have grown up in these kinds of systems, that we learn to separate ourselves emotionally from our family of origin. One of the writers on Sharon Wakeshaughter Cruz writes a book called Choice Making, and she says when you grow up in these families, you really don't have any choices. You stay stuck in the system. You stay stuck trying to save that parent. It's almost impossible to make that emotional break and to go ahead and have your own life. And so part of what you have to do in working with them is to get them to make that emotional break, to realize it wasn't their fault. There's nothing they can do to save those parents. They can do something to save themselves, and they can learn to care about the people, but not to stay hooked into it. And the other thing that I think is real helpful is to look at the family rules, the family beliefs that you have that might be contributing to keeping you kind of stuck in these systems and keep you stuck in your feelings. And so I'm going to give you, it's codependency and family rules. And if you would, just look at it, and you can see starting from the left side on codependency rules are the rules that sometimes families that are real dysfunctional will have. And going from 1 to 5, where are you on this continuum across? Did you grow up in a family, and do you still think it's not okay to talk about your problems? Keeping secrets. Don't think, don't talk, don't feel. Or do you try to share your problems and get feedback about yourself from other people? What we find is as people start changing and growing and learning, they can move from this left side over to the right side. Some families' feelings should not be expressed openly. I know there would be a lot of people that would be real uncomfortable to stand up before a group and talk about the fact that they've grown up in a real dysfunctional family. There was a time growing up in my family that would have been a secret, that I shouldn't have shared that. Even now, I think my little mother up in Ponca, if she knew I was telling it, she'd just probably not be real thrilled with me, so I don't tell her. There's some secrets I keep. But I think it's important for me to recognize this and to share it with other people. We can look at the codependency rules in a minute and then also see if you have any questions, but there was one thing I did want to announce. Mike Wright, he's one of the head residents here on campus, is forming an adult children of alcoholics group. And it's really good for anybody that's grown up in any kind of dysfunctional family. It's kind of like a support group. As some of you probably know, they've been springing up all over the country, and it's been really helpful to people that have grown up in families where there's been a lot of pain. He's holding the meetings, if y'all want to make a note on it, it's Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. in the Twin Towers 102E, which I think is his office. His extension is 281 or 283. And they're just starting to form, and oftentimes I think it's really helpful to get into a support group and get into a group and learn some more about these things and talk about it and help to work through any feelings that anyone has. I know that some of us grow up in healthier families than others, but the more I work in the field, the more I recognize that very few people had parents who had parents who had parents who were able to supply them with all that we need to grow up and be healthy and happy. And sometimes it becomes necessary to find places and to do things for ourselves so that we can pass on to our children a little better heritage than what we got. What questions you have?
He's already raised his children and so on, but some of these patterns are still there. To change is kind of important.
I guess my question is it ever too late to feel better? Yeah. I know that one woman, a friend of mine's a psychologist back east, and he was telling me that at one time this lady was coming to him, and she was 68 at that time. And he said she was just wonderful. He said she figured she had to live the rest of her life, and she might as well live it a little better than she had the first 68 years. So she was trying to learn and grow and change. And the things that I learned that I wasn't able to help my children that much with, I'm passing information on to them now, things I'm learning and ways that I'm growing. And I've got a grandchild coming next month, and I'm real excited to pass on some of this stuff. So I don't know how it can ever be too late. Yeah. What else? Okay, thank you.